Arthur Woodbury, Artie Woodbury, Managing Director of Woodbury Capital and Vice President of Woodbury Corporation. He joined the company in 2012. He's the Managing Director of the Woodbury Capital Funds, a $170 million equity commitment, and oversees asset management for the Woodbury Strategic Partners Fund, over $140 million in that fund. He is also part of the leadership team directing the redevelopment of University Place in Orem. Prior to joining Woodbury Corporation, Arthur spent 4 years in the real estate private equity teams at Blackstone Group and with Goldman Sachs in London, where he participated on transactions totaling more than $6 billion. Arthur has a BA in International Relations from the University of Pennsylvania, which I think is where our dean went to school as well, where he got his PhD at Wharton School there, and a minor in urban real estate development in conjunction with the Wharton School, and a master's in finance and strategy from the Institute in Paris. And you're going to have to help me with those other words. I blew them. I see them, but I can't. And I'll let you tell us something about your personal life, too, because he has a family, and he's a very committed family man. We are thrilled to welcome Artie Woodbury for our final speaker. Would you please do me the pleasure of joining him with a round of applause?
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Tom. It's really an honor to have the opportunity to be here with you today. As you might imagine, I hold and my family holds this university and this business school in very high esteem, and had the opportunity to watch the recordings of some of the prior lectures, and just really humbled and honored to be able to address you. This is a really cool thing. I'll speak a little bit about some of my history and some of my family life, and I'll try and get through my presentation relatively quickly so we can answer any questions if you might have any questions. But as I thought about what I might speak about today, I realized we're probably not that far removed from one another. I'll be 35 this month, so I graduated from my undergrad studies about 12 years ago. I graduated from my grad school studies about 10 years ago. And so I figure we're probably only 10 or 15 years apart from one another, or maybe even less. Just so I have a sense, how many people here have already had a full-time job or have had a longer than a 3-month internship? Show me raise of hands. Okay, great, cool. That's good to know. I'll try and speak to some of those things as I go through my presentation. So I don't have the same experience as some of the others that have addressed you. I don't have the same amount of gray hair. I do have some gray hair, unfortunately. But I figured that my experience was a little bit more fresh as it relates to when I was starting my career and some of the memories and things that I learned as I went through those initial years, and how I've tried to build my career from there. So, like Tom mentioned, he gave you a little bit of background, but I figured I'd just give you a little bit more information on my career path, and just to give you a little bit more of a sense so you have some context for my experience, and also some context for the stories that I'll tell with my presentation. So I grew up in Salt Lake City. When I was 18, I moved to Philadelphia. I went to the University of Pennsylvania. Like Tom said, I did a major in international relations and French. I also did a minor in real estate. I grew up working at Woodbury Corporation in the summers in high school, and after the summer after my freshman year of college as well. And my first real office job after, in a place that was unfamiliar to me was the summer after my sophomore year of college. I worked as an intern to the marketing director of Cherry Hill Mall in New Jersey, which is a community just across the river from Philadelphia. Had a really cool experience. My junior year of college, I actually studied abroad for the whole year in Paris. I went to Sciences Po, which the Institute of Political Studies, studied the European Union, studied languages, studied social sciences. Was really a cool year. Was able to actually get an internship that summer working at the National School of Administration in France, or ENA is what they call it. And just to give you some context, all of the presidents of the French Fifth Republic, which is the government since shortly after the Second World War, went to one or both of these schools. So just kind of give you a sense for what these schools kind of are. But had a cool experience. Moved back to Philadelphia. Finished my senior year. Got a part-time internship working about 20 hours a week while I was finishing up my studies at a residential real estate developer called the Klein Company in Philadelphia. Those guys were great, had a great experience. They actually kept me on full-time as an intern through the summer after I graduated. And then I moved back to Paris, and I did a master's degree in finance and strategy. It was a 3-semester program, and I also had to do an internship. So spent the first year working on taking classes in higher level accounting, corporate finance, some things that I just didn't get the opportunity to really study when I was in my undergrad. So it was a great year. Ended up getting a job for the summer up in London with Goldman Sachs. I interned in their real estate investment group, or REPIA is the name of the group. We managed the Whitehall funds, which were the funds that Goldman was managing, investing all over the world, and our group managed investments in Europe. It was a crazy experience for me, working off of a very tight student budget, and then moving to London, and all of a sudden, this was in May of 2007, or the summer of 2007, I should say, and this is sort of the height of the bull market before the recession. I was taking business trips, looking at real estate all over Europe, flying in business class, et cetera. I'd never done that before, kind of this surreal experience. But moved back to Paris, finished up my last semester. I graduated in February 2008, and I actually received a full-time offer to go back and work for Goldman starting in May of that year, of 2008. And so I had 2 months after I graduated. I wasn't really sure what I was going to do, and I frankly hesitated whether or not I include this on this slide or not, but I moved to Coruña in Galicia in Spain to really go and work on my Spanish. I had taken Spanish, in school, and decided that if I was ever going to learn, I had to go and get that immersion experience, and took those 2 months to do that. And then moved back to London and started full-time with Goldman. I spent a lot of hours at the office in those 3 years at Goldman as an analyst, but it was really less about the amount of hours I was spending. It was more about the exposure and the things I was learning. I was learning something new every day. It was an amazing experience from a career-building standpoint and just a professional and personal, building experience. And then transitioned, I skipped ahead, but transitioned, spent a year at Blackstone as well, working in their real estate investment group in London. And unfortunately, shortly into my time at Blackstone, had some family stuff come up and felt like I needed to make the transition back home and be nearer to family and work with my family. And so moved back to Omaha, Nebraska. And I should have mentioned, I married a French girl while I was in London. Despite all the hours in the office, I found enough time to court and marry my beautiful wife. But moving to Omaha, she'd never lived in the States before. This was a big transition. We were there for about 6 months. We ended up really liking it. Omaha's a great place. I don't know how much, if anyone spent time there. But in any case, worked on a project there for 6 months, got it off the ground, and eventually moved back to Salt Lake, where I've been the last 6 years since the end of 2012. Like Tom mentioned, spending a lot of time working on the redevelopment of University Place, and then also working on building our private equity business, our real estate private equity business, which has been a really challenging and fun thing to have been able to do. So that gives you some context for my experience, and also will give you some context for some stories I'm going to tell. But in my presentation, I want to focus on 7 key messages that hopefully would be helpful to you as you're thinking about starting and building your career, things that I've learned and that have been really important for me and have helped to shape my philosophy on how I try to interact in the business world. So the first message, he who hesitates is lost. I'll tell you a quick story. So I mentioned I did this internship in London after being in Paris for a year. And I got there and my clothes didn't fit the same way that all the other people there, the clothes fit. I bought my suits from Mr. Mac. They were a little bit baggier. I had pointy collars. Everyone had sort of these tucked back collars, and I felt really out of place. I didn't speak the same way. I didn't sound the same. I tried to just work really hard and do my best, but nonetheless, one day I was helping prepare a presentation. We had a group of a German company was coming into London to meet with us, and there were about 15 people. And I was asked, as the intern, just to get everything printed and bring everything to the room for the meeting. So I printed everything out, but 15 presentation books, I couldn't just carry it, normally. I had to end up putting it into a box. So I had this cardboard box. I'm walking through the halls of Goldman Sachs, kind of feeling a little bit out of place doing that. But I get to the elevator, and my managing director walks up behind me and rides the elevator with me up to our floor. And we're standing in this elevator, and I'm kind of thinking, okay, well, what can I say, to my boss? I really didn't interact with him much as an intern. And I was hoping he might say something, but didn't. So just kind of this awkward silence. And we get to our floor, and I kind of move forward to hesitate and look at him, and he moves forward, and he turns to me and says, "Arthur, he who hesitates is lost." And he walks out of the elevator and goes into the meeting room. And I just am standing there holding this box thinking to myself, oh no, I've just blown it, all this hard work, and I've just completely blown it in this one moment. And, it's something that's really stuck with me, and I've thought a lot about that experience. And what I've come to realize is that, people are people. I was so worried about whether or not I fit in and whether or not, my ideas were relevant in a meeting or whether or not I could really participate, in this sort of high finance world. I was just a kid from Salt Lake, and what did I know? But I've come to realize that people are people, and you have to just, some people say, imagine that, you're presenting to people and or someone, they're sitting in their underwear, however that expression goes. But I think you just got to make people human and understand that, my MD, he was green like me once too. He was an intern and an analyst once too. And you just got to think about things that way. And not saying you shouldn't be deferential to those that are senior to you and try and listen and learn from those that have more experience. But you can participate and you can take action and you can do well. Just from a visual standpoint, hopefully these 4 people are familiar, the last 4 presidents of our country. And if you were told, hey, I want you to prepare an investment pitch and go and pitch it to these 4 guys, it's probably a pretty intimidating thing to do, to have if you were going to go sit in a boardroom and do that. But what if instead you just had to pitch it to these guys? You've got a guy holding his young baby. You've got guys that are in their button-down shirts with long hair, and another guy with beard and long hair. I mean, it's a totally different experience and a different prospect if you think about it that way. But so just remember, people are people. We're all human, and what you have to do is have confidence and prepare and do your best to not hesitate. So first message, don't hesitate. Second message, know the facts. So this story I'll tell as it relates to this message is one that I actually didn't get to witness firsthand, but a really good friend of mine that I worked with at Blackstone was working on the acquisition of a portfolio of mall retail assets in Poland. And it was a big enough transaction that the senior management from New York wanted to fly into Poland and meet up with the team in Europe and tour all these assets. And so they spent 2 days driving all over the country, visiting these assets. And he got to be in the car with a very, very famous investor, one of the co-founders of the Blackstone Real Estate Group, which has been one of the largest and most successful real estate investment groups ever. And he got to sit with him and ride in the car, and he got the opportunity to just kind of lean over to him one day in the car and say, hey, what's your secret? How did you do it? To a guy that's a billionaire and super successful. And he said, it's simple. Know the facts. Know the facts. And, he told me this story, and for whatever reason, again, this really stuck with me. And I've come to learn as I've progressed through my career that this is so, so true. Just the visual I'll give you, hopefully you've seen the movie The Big Short, or you may have read the book by Michael Lewis, The Big Short. But one of the key protagonists in this story, and this is obviously about the investors that ended up shorting the housing market, shorting these mortgage-backed securities, and making a lot of money doing that. But one of those key characters was Dr. Michael Burry, who was really one of the first to kind of clue into this and ran a small hedge fund. And so there's this scene in the movie where he's on the phone with an investor, and Christian Bale played this guy. The guy on the right side is your right side is the actual person. But he's on the phone with an investor explaining this trade that he wants to do to short these bonds, and the investor says to them, well, how do you know these bonds are worthless? I mean, aren't these full of thousands of mortgages with thousands of pages of documentation? And he just says, I read them. And, the investor response says, well, only the lawyers that wrote those things, read those things. What are you talking about? You read them. And he just says, I read them. And I think that's a really important lesson. I mean, if you're going into a situation, if you're trying to figure out, a career move, if you're trying to make a presentation or be compelling in a meeting, I mean, knowledge really is power. And the more that you know, the more that you can read, or, in the real estate industry, if you can go walk a property, if you can go and try and get that extra bit of insight and really know the facts as best as you can, you'll always be better prepared to be making good decisions as you move forward. So know the facts. Next message that I would just pass along is time is precious. Time truly is precious. I mean, I have actually had the opportunity to work with someone that I really admire. He runs a big family office out of Idaho and does a lot of investing. And I've got to hear him speak at various different functions. And I've actually heard him use this quote a few times as he's spoken. And so I'll just quickly read it. "My favorite things in life don't cost any money. It's really clear that the most precious resource we all have is time." So this is Steve Jobs. I mean, this is a guy that made tons of money, that built a huge company. I mean, the largest in the world at one point, $1 trillion company. And, just an amazing person, and, had some illnesses, et cetera, that probably caused him to, feel this way. But I think this is a really special idea and something we all need to be focused on. Our most precious resource that we have is time. Another just quick quote that I'll share, and this is one that I wrote on my wall when I was in college, and that is that to move the world, we must first move ourselves, and this is attributed to Socrates. And I think, again, this is a really important concept. I mentioned that I went to Coruña to learn Spanish. Well, those 2 months that I had off, I debated whether or not I should just go goof around. Some people were telling me that. They're saying, hey, you're going to be working 100-hour weeks, and you should just go goof around for 2 months and get that out of your system so you can go and work hard. I debated whether or not I should go home and spend some time with family. But ultimately, I decided, if I'm ever going to do this, if I'm ever going to learn Spanish, I got to just go do it now. And so I went and did that. My third year at Goldman, in 2011, was right when the Spanish banks were just starting to kind of, release some of their real estate portfolios. They'd foreclosed on a lot of real estate over the couple of years since the recession, and they just had tons of real estate on their balance sheets and needed to sell it. And my group had hired a woman, a great real estate professional, to go and chase that opportunity. And interestingly enough, I was the only analyst in my team that spoke Spanish. And so I got to be staffed with her, working directly with her every week, flying to Spain, a different city, meeting with a different bank to go and underwrite this real estate, which was just an amazing experience. And had I not spent that month and a half in Coruña when I could have been off doing something else, I wouldn't have been able to do that. I wouldn't have been in that position to be able to do that. Another quick story, I worked with a really good friend of mine, went to school with all of my life, frankly, with a good friend of mine that was a great athlete, was a great high school football player, got a scholarship, was a great college football player, went on and played in the pros for 7 years. And while he was playing in the pros, I was with him, and I asked him a question. I said, have you seen this TV show? I really like this TV show. And he said, yeah, I don't watch TV. And I said, what do you mean you don't watch TV? He's like, yeah, I got rid of my TV. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, I just threw it away. I was like, you threw away your TV? He said, yeah, I realized I was just wasting so much time. And he said, so what I've actually done is I bought these 3 old computers, I took them all apart, and I've been putting them back together. I've just been trying to figure out how these things work. And I was thinking to myself, like, you're a pro football player. Like, what? You could be doing something totally, you have money, you have, time on your hands. You could be doing something totally different. Why are you doing that? And he also, over the years, I found out that he actually, I think, was doing things against his football team's policy. And in his off season, he was doing internships. He was working for financial companies. He was working for design firms. He even got an internship, I think, at Elle magazine for a summer in his or for a month or two in his off season. And when he was done in the pros, he actually applied and was accepted as an analyst at Goldman Sachs in their investment banking, telecommunications, media, and technology group. And so he went and spent a year there, he worked really hard, and then got a job at a prestigious hedge fund investing in these tech companies. And so, here's a guy that, he threw away his TV because he realized he was wasting time. And, I think that you got to constantly be thinking about that. How are you using your time? It's your most precious resource, so pass that message along. Fourth message, everything happens for a reason. So I went back to Paris after I had spent my year abroad there, and I did that degree in finance, but I got to tell you, after my year abroad, I kind of felt like I had my international experience and thought that was really cool, and what I really wanted to do was go to law school. So I had taken the LSAT. I had, done well in school or tried to do my best in school, and applied to law schools, and I didn't get into some of the places I really wanted to go, and it was really discouraging for me. I kind of felt like, well, what am I going to do? How did I blow this? And one day I went and met with my advisor, my college advisor, and she said, well, hey, don't you have that offer to go back and do that master's degree in Paris? And I said, well, I do. Fortunately, when I was there, I worked hard and I had good enough grades that they admitted me to come back if I wanted to come back and do a master's. But I kind of said, I never really thought I would do that. I always thought I was going to go and be a lawyer and, probably just, go work for Woodbury Corporation or stay in the States. But as I thought about it, I decided, maybe I should do this, And so I went back and I did that master's degree. And, a series of things happened. My life was totally changed. I met my wife. I probably would have never met her, or at least definitely not in the same circumstance. And all those things changed as a result of, this one hard issue that actually turned into a huge blessing. There's this concept in economic theory that Joseph Schumpeter really popularized, or at least really spent a lot of time describing, which is creative destruction. And it talks about how old companies or old market norms are blown up by new technology or new market norms, and the capitalist economy is constantly changing, and this process is constantly ongoing. And just show an image, which I think is kind of a neat one, of the Yellowstone forest growing back after this massive fire in 1988. And in your professional life and in your career path, you're going to have these fires. You're going to have these major issues, and I could talk about a handful of others that have just been huge to me in my life. I talk about this law school example, but what you got to do is you got to, acknowledge that you had a fire, but okay, what do I do next? And get yourself out of the funk and move forward, and let the creative process take over and recreate. So everything happens for a reason, but make sure that you're an actor in your career path and you move yourself along. Next message, the guys in the white hats win. This is actually one that my dad is constantly saying to me. And I told him I was going to be doing this lecture, and he reminded me of a story when he was young in his career, where he was in a meeting with his dad, and he just got really animated in a meeting, raised his voice, sort of talked down to the people that they were meeting with, and was really trying to put them in their place and prove them wrong because they had taken sort of a wrong position. And after the meeting, my grandfather, went and met with my dad in his office and said, hey, son, what's the deal? Why are you so angry? Or why did you, feel like you had to do that? And he said, well, these people are wrong, and we have to, show them that they're wrong. And my grandfather stood up and said, son, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And, in business, there's really, often you find yourself in this zero-sum game type of scenario. Sometimes you have a win-win situation and things can work out, and most of the time, hopefully, that can be the case in business, but often you find yourself competing, and if I win, you lose, and that's the reality of business. However, it doesn't mean that, if you're being competitive and if you're working hard, it doesn't mean that you can't be fair, doesn't mean that you can't have integrity, doesn't mean that you can't be consistent and logical. And if you can do all those things, you can be the guy in the white hat. You can do the right thing, from a business ethics standpoint, et cetera. And it's really, really important. I've had the opportunity to interact with business leaders in a lot of different settings, in a lot of different places, and the vast majority of the people that I've seen that are leaders are those that really inspire confidence. And they inspire that confidence by being a good person and by trying to exercise fairness, kindness even, and consistency as they go about executing in their business practices. Sixth key message: be courageous. Just tell a quick story. A good friend of mine from college, his dad was an ophthalmologist. His grandfather was a toilet seat salesman. Really didn't have much experience or knowledge of business on his mom's side, sort of same thing. But he had an interest in real estate. And so he decided, I'm going to try and get a job and do that. He was from Connecticut, had never really left the East Coast, didn't have any family anywhere else in the country but the East Coast. He traveled some. But he got a job in San Francisco coming out of college, working for a bank in their real estate lending group. And he debated, should I move all the way across the country, and should I really do this? And ultimately, he decided, hey, I'm going to do it. So he went and did it, did work there for a year, ended up getting a job at an investment firm, and did really well there. Then got a job at a more prestigious, real estate private equity firm. Worked really hard to the point in his early 30s he was going to be promoted to become a partner at this firm. But he turned that down actually and decided he was going to go start his own business. This while he was actually just going to get married. And so this was a few years ago, and he had some savings. He went and invested his savings and worked this thing, didn't have any cash flow, and then just this last year was able to sell these assets that he invested in and had a huge success. All of these things he did by being courageous. I mean, often we talk about taking risks, taking calculated risks, but I kind of like to focus more on the being courageous part of it. I mean, yes, you have to take risks. You have to make sure you've spent the time knowing the facts and use your time wisely to try and figure those things out. But at the end of the day, you have to be courageous and go for it. Steve Schwartzman, who started Blackstone, he gave a great, when answering a question about what it was like to start Blackstone, he gave a great comment. Force of will counts. It counts. It takes a remarkable human effort to overcome a world that isn't as anxious for you as you are for it. And so, you have to be courageous. You have to exercise, faith in yourself and work hard. There's also, not sure if you're familiar with the musical on Broadway called Hamilton. I actually haven't seen it yet. I really want to see it, but I've bought the soundtrack and I've listened to it numerous times, and frankly, brings me to tears just listening to it. It's just so phenomenal, the writing. And the writer is Lin-Manuel Miranda, who's this actor that I've pictured here. But there's this great line and theme throughout that, this is with reference to Alexander Hamilton, the founding father, who was an orphan, who, had all these hardships, but nonetheless was able to become, this amazing character. And that theme is, there's a million things I haven't done, just you wait, just you wait. And every day you got to wake up thinking that. You got to have a fire in your belly saying, hey, there's a million things I haven't done. Just you wait, just you wait. And have the courage to go and push forward and do those things. And this is something that I think about, every day as I wake up, what haven't I done? What am I going to do? Finally, last message, and then hopefully we can have a bit of a discussion and I can answer some questions. But this message is one step at a time, one step at a time. When I was making the decision to move back to the States, it was a really tough one, and was able to speak with my brother who gave me some really good advice. And he said to me, Artie, the worst thing you can do is make a decision before you have to. Don't make a decision until you absolutely have to. And, I think what he was saying was, look, know the facts, spend the time, be courageous, get yourself to that point where it's time to make a decision. And once you're there, follow your gut and follow your heart and make that decision and move forward. And all you can do is one decision at a time. If you have a goal of being, an entrepreneur that's going to start and sell, a $10 million business or whatever it is, I mean, you're not going to, from today, where you're just starting out, be there tomorrow. One step at a time, you got to be making those decisions. And sometimes you're going to make wrong decisions, and you got to remember, everything happens for a reason, and something's going to, come of it. But you're going to keep making those decisions, and you got to do it one step at a time. And so be patient and work through it one step at a time. So those are my key messages and thoughts that I wanted to share. With that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer questions. Would also be really curious, frankly, to hear some of your experiences as you've started and been building your career. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Well, how did you pursue internships? How did you go about through that process?
Yeah, I worked with my university, frankly. They had a posting board that I was able to go and look where people had posted saying, hey, we're looking for interns. But it's so critical to have a good resume, and a well-formatted resume. I I think that's something you want to make sure you spend time on. Make sure that you have, thought about your story when you're going in and interviewing with someone. Why is it that you're really there, and why does that kind of fit into what you've done or what you're trying to do? But that was really important. And then frankly, kind of just back to that force of will thing, it's just, getting after it and sending the resumes and going and knocking on doors and trying to find those opportunities. I mean, I mentioned the Cherry Hill Mall internship, one of my first internships, and that's what that was. I mean, they had a posting, I sent my resume, I went there and actually handed them a hard copy of my resume, and it goes a long way showing that effort. Yeah.
You talked about not hesitating, then you also talked about being courageous, jump forward. I mean, where is the line for you? There are some points where you're just not going to get the information that you need. Yet there's sometimes where you got to lean forward. We talked a lot just about how at this point in our lives you're kind of trying to plant seeds and figure out where you're going. And you're like, how do you know when you have that? It's not hesitating.
Okay, yeah, great question. So the question was, how do you know when you don't have when you have enough to not hesitate? When do you have enough information to have the courage to move forward? I think the response to that is you don't. And that's the sort of the risk-taking part of it. But I think that you'll have a better sense. You'll have a general sense on your own that you do, or if you do, or if you don't. For example. Looking at a real estate investment. I mean, for us, we know that if we can figure out this set of information, and if we can really kind of have that established, then we feel comfortable saying, okay, we're gonna take that calculated risk and move forward. So we're gonna study the market information. We're gonna study the local market specifics of what rents or how all that works, and then. We feel like we'll have the information that we need to be able to say, okay, yeah, we're going to take a risk. We don't know for sure if building this building is actually going to work or not, but we have a pretty good sense based on having understood and having a good understanding of this set of facts that we can move forward. So no one has the crystal ball like everyone says, and no one knows for sure. But I guess the point is that if you spent the time and you feel like you have enough of those facts solidified in your mind, then at some point you got to do it. And you're never going to have perfect information, and that's the hard part of building your career is trying to go and figure out, okay, how do I make that am I ready to make that decision? What I will say is once you've made that decision, pour yourself into it. Get after it, and that's the be courageous part. Because if you don't do that, if you're kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out, it's not going to work, and it can't work. And so you gotta make sure that you allow yourself the ability to really do that once you're making that decision. Are you building a company, or I don't know? You referenced.
No, it's just that kind of at this point in your life, you're like, where do I want to go?
Yeah.
There's so many options right now.
Yeah.
It's kind of a good market to get started here in Utah.
Yeah.
You've got so many. But you also feel like you got to jump on it quick. But at the same time, you don't want to invest everything in one basket without having threats.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is hard. It's really hard to know, okay, what's going to be my first job, or what am I going to go and put all my eggs in one basket, etc. What I will say is I think that you have some leeway when you're young to go and try some new things. And when I say young, like young in your career, to go and try some new things. And so I would say, pick something that you think you're ready and that you like and push for it. And really go and sell yourself on it. Say, hey, this is what I want to do. Because if you can't do that, then you're not going to be convincing to an employer, that this is really what you want to do. One other part that I didn't speak about on the be courageous thing is, it's going to be really easy. Once you'll see, your first year in a new job is always kind of tough. You're trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to do? I need to impress these people. But once you've kind of settled in a little bit, it's really easy to become complacent. It's really easy to say, okay, I just need to do this work, and I know what I need to do, and I'm going to get there at 8, and I'm going to leave at 5, and not really be worried about it. But the thing is that if you let yourself become complacent, then you're not doing what Lin-Manuel Miranda had to say about Alexander Hamilton. You're not doing those million things. And so, I think the important thing is just always, again, to have that fire in your belly, and to really say, okay, I'm going to go and attack this day, and I'm going to try and do it better. Or yeah, I know I need to be doing this, but what can I be doing to show my boss that maybe I can even be doing this and move forward? So I think that the important thing is just where is your mind at, and make sure that you're present and you're there and you're really trying to push forward.
The Woodbury Corporation and University Place.
Sure.
In this highly competitive retail market where Amazon is running all these giant retailers out of business, how's the Woodbury Corporation addressing this new competitive environment, especially in this area where we see it happening all the time?
Yeah. No, great question. So the question was, how is Woodbury Corporation, which, we've been a retail real estate operator for the most part in the history of our company. And, with University Place, how are we trying to compete or figure out this new paradigm with Amazon and online retailing? The slide on creative destruction is really relevant as it relates to this particular issue. And I think that, the interesting thing with retail is that physical space still matters, but old formats are being completely disrupted by this new model. And so some sort of integration between the technology and the physical space retailing, we think is really the way forward. Nonetheless, it's hard as a real estate owner to be working with tenants that have been really strong for a number of years that are now really struggling, and say, okay, well, what do we really have? But a big part of the reason why we're working on redeveloping University Place and adding office, adding residential is because we recognize that. And we're also reinvesting in the retail and changing it substantially as well, because we recognize those changes are happening, and that for a real estate operator, that's what you have to be doing. You have to be looking forward, and you have to be taking some risks and causing that asset to change and to evolve with the market.
Artie, if I may, you might explain what happened to Mervyn's and what happened to what was Nordstrom's or JCPenney's, and how they're a different retail fit or they're gone. Maybe you could address those two.
Yeah, sure. So Mervyn's went out of business, and we had a vacant box there for a long period of time. And frankly, all over the country, this is the issue, is you have these department store retailers that used to be able to just bring merchandise into a store, and this is where people would shop, and they could move merchandise through these large surface areas. But now with online retailing, you don't need the same amount of merchandise in a store. You're able to deliver merchandise, and these large box formats for certain of these types of retailers they were annihilated. They didn't get the same sales that they were getting because they had all these other options now that were able to service, having that stock a lot differently. So, these companies have started to fail. Nordstrom actually was a different story. We feel like, from what we understand, they were actually performing and doing well, but they wanted to pursue a different strategy in terms of how they were positioning their brand, and so they left. But we had these two vacancies. And what we determined is that, some of this space that we had built just was not the right format. And so we tore down the Mervyn's, if you're familiar with that building. And we've actually, in its place, we're going to be building office buildings. We've created a spine for development that'll allow for redevelopment all along that new street that we've put in there in the place where Mervyn's used to be. And we'll be building office buildings and residential buildings there instead. With Nordstrom, we actually were able to bring in R.C. Willey, who's been a great partner in our retailing environment there. But it's just a totally different type of retailer, a retailer that actually was forming a strategy that actually competes very well with what online retailing was disrupting, and or at least exists alongside that paradigm. And so that's what we're doing now, is we're working with companies that are trying to address that or have moats or ways of fending off online retailing. And we're changing what we have so that it works for the new paradigm. Sure.
You talked about your friend who got rid of their TV to kind of better utilize their time. So what do you do to utilize your spare time and your free time to like stay at the top of your game?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The question was, I mentioned my friend that threw away his TV because he realized he was wasting time. And so the question was, what do I do to better prioritize and use my time? I would say one thing that I started doing in college that I've done since is that I've been very religious about planning my week, having sort of a planner where I knew when my classes were in college, or for me, I know when my meetings are in my workday. I know when now, as a father, I know when my kid's recital is. I know all those things, and I have it on my calendar, and I check that every morning and every evening, and I'm thinking about the next day, and I'm thinking about those things. And I know when I have blocks of time to be working on other things. The other thing I do is I keep a list of all the things I know I need to be doing. And I have a work list, I have a personal list, and I'm looking at those blocks of time where that are empty, and then I'm looking at my list, and I'm saying, okay, I can get this thing done at this time, or I can get this thing done at that time. So I would say planning is a really critical thing that I've done. Another thing that I'll say is, and this is I'm still learning as a father, but I think that it's really important that when you're allocating time, however you're allocating it, that you're using that time efficiently and you're really focused on the task at hand. So if you're at work, make sure you're at work and you're cranking. I mean, sometimes it's easy to get to the office and get caught up in a conversation and waste 30 minutes talking about the football games over the weekend or whatever it is. But if you do that, then you're not going to get your work done in the day, and then it's going to be 5:30 or 6:30 or whatever it is, and you're supposed to be home for dinner, and your work's not done. So then you're home, but then you're worried about work, and you're not thinking about family and anything else. And so if you can have that discipline to, when you're at work, say, okay, I'm going to be really efficient. I'm going to make these phone calls. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to get this done, and at 6 p.m. or 6:30 p.m. I'm leaving, and I'm going to go and be home with my family and not look at my phone and not do those things. So. I think that we all know our sort of guilty pleasures in life, and things where we're wasting time. Maybe we're staying up late watching a movie, not sleeping, so we wake up the next day and we're groggy, or video games or whatever it might be. And I think that what we all have to do is recognize that we need to allocate some time for those things and for pleasure, but we also need to be cognizant that if we can be disciplined and use our time, then we can be that much more effective. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here with you today.